I'm Tim Constantine, and from Washington, D.C., this is the Capitol Hill Show. Jim Jordan is a two-time NCAA national champion wrestler and former wrestling coach. Since his election in 2006, he's brought that same fight to the United States Congress. He now serves as chairman of what many would argue is the most powerful committee in the United States House of Representatives. He is chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Among the things Jordan's committee is looking at are allegations of corruption by President Joe Biden and his family, including Biden's son and brother. Hunter Biden is the adult son of United States President Joe Biden. Hunter has a well-documented history of drug abuse and addiction. He has a child out of wedlock with a stripper. He recorded himself in a variety of compromising situations and generally embarrassing behavior. Yet, somehow, he was able to convince foreign governments and foreign business entities to give him great sums of money. Millions of dollars, in fact. The question now is whether he used the influence of his father, President Joe Biden, to earn that money, and whether he shared any of that money with his dad.
There's no evidence to support the allegations that my father was financially involved in my business because it did not happen.
The president's brother, James Biden, also made big money off the Biden brand. In 2008, the FBI was investigating a bribery case in the state of Mississippi when they realized James Biden was working with the target of their investigation. Is the Biden family corrupt? And if so, was President Biden part of the corruption? Judiciary is also going back over the details of January 6, 2021, when rioters overtook the United States Capitol building, and over the question as to whether President Trump incited that event.
We will never give up. We will never concede.
On January 6, 2021, President Trump spoke to a large crowd gathered in Washington, D.C. He complained about the news media. He complained about Republicans. He said we're not supportive enough of him. And he made several complaints about the 2020 election being stolen from him.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats.
That, in and of itself, does not mean he incited the crowd to violence or to try to take over the government. Yet, many believe he did. In fact, at one point, Trump's comments to the tens of thousands gathered talked about a peaceful and patriotic protest.
You have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt.
Finally, the committee is looking into whether or not branches of the United States government have been weaponized against political opponents. Chairman Jordan is a man of facts. He's also a man of candor. I caught up with him at his Capitol Hill office here in Washington, D.C. Representing the great state of Ohio since his first election in 2006, joining us is Chairman Jim Jordan. Mr. Chairman, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Good to be with you.
You know, during the Trump years, there were allegations, there were accusations, there was the Trump-Russia allegation, turned out to be false. There was the Ukraine conversation with the president of Ukraine, turned out to be nothing. There was scandal after scandal we spent years on.
Yep.
And by the end of 4 years, there was scandal fatigue. People were exhausted with it. And yet, before the Republicans even took control of the House, you told me one of the top priorities will be investigating Hunter Biden and his business dealings if we take the House. Tell me why that's important.
Well, because as Devin Archer, his business partner, said in a deposition under oath, he said, you know, what they were selling was the brand, and the brand was Joe Biden, this access to a top official in our government back when he was vice president. Of course, now the highest office in our government as president of the United States. I always say you can tell this story. Really, it's an old story. You got a politician who does certain things. Those actions and efforts benefit his family financially, and then there's also an effort to cover it up. And that's exactly what played out here. And the easiest way to see this is through the involvement of Hunter Biden in this Ukrainian energy company, Burisma. And we pointed this out. So, and we'll continue to. Hunter Biden gets put on the board of Burisma, fact number one. Fact number two, he's not qualified to be on the board. Don't take my word for it. Take what he said. He said he got the job because of his family. And fact number three, the head of the Burisma, Zolochevsky, the executives that run the company, asked Hunter Biden, weigh in. We're under pressure from the Ukrainian government. Can you help us? Fact number four, Hunter Biden calls his dad. His dad a few days later goes to Ukraine and says, you're not getting the money that had already been approved by the State Department, already been set to go there. You're not getting the money unless you fire the prosecutor who's applying the pressure. And then there was an effort, and this is what we've been focusing on in the Judiciary Committee, there was an effort by the Justice Department to kind of make this all go away with the sweetheart deal for Hunter Biden.
Well, and I think that's the important definition here, is plenty of people have adult children that may make choices they wouldn't make, or may do things that embarrass them. They may have siblings. We had Billy Carter during the Jimmy Carter era that were embarrassing to them at times. But you're saying here there is a connection. There's a connection between what Hunter Biden, President Biden's son, was doing and the president, at that time vice president, himself.
Yeah. Joe Biden, this is a Washington Post story, again, not my words. Washington Post writes an article, when Hunter Biden in Dubai, as asked by the people who run Burisma, can you help us with the pressure we are facing, the pressure we are under from the prosecutor in Ukraine? We asked Devin Archer in the deposition, when you were given that request, what did Hunter Biden do next? And Devin Archer's response was, he called his dad. So he calls the vice president, who was scheduled to go to Ukraine 3 days later. The Washington Post reports on the flight over, Joe Biden called an audible. He decided on the flight over that they weren't going to just push to fire the prosecutor. They were going to leverage your tax dollar, the constituents I represent, their tax dollars, American citizens' tax dollars. And he was going to say, if you don't fire this guy, you're not getting the $1 billion loan guarantee. And that's exactly what he did. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. Joe Biden bragged about it when he gave a speech after he left office.
Simple question, is that illegal?
This is what's interesting. You're not supposed to make policy decisions solely based on how it may benefit your family. And that's what it looks like. Now, we're continuing to get additional evidence. Chairman Comer, Chairman Smith, and our committee are working on this. But I think it is interesting because that all happens, and then you jump to the investigation of Hunter Biden by David Weiss and the Biden Justice Department, and you see this sweetheart deal put together, and you realize that this 5-year investigation into Hunter Biden, they actually decided not to bring any tax charges for 2014, 2015. Those are the tax years when most of the Burisma, this Ukrainian energy company, most of that income was coming into Hunter Biden. And everyone on the case said we should charge for that. This is a big problem. Felony tax charges for those years. But David Weiss decides, no, we're going to let the statute of limitations lapse for those tax years, because it's one thing to charge Hunter Biden with some misdemeanor tax issues and to charge him on some diversion agreement on a gun charge in Delaware. It's an entirely different matter if you charge him on those Burisma tax years felony, because Burisma gets you back to the White House, gets you back links to the President of the United States. And I think that's what they wanted to avoid. Only problem was, I think they frankly would have got away with it, but for the two brave whistleblowers, Mr. Shapley and Mr. Ziegler, who came forward. And then because of their coming forward with the facts, I think that helped the judge in Delaware look at all this and say, no, I'm not going for this crazy deal that I've never seen anything like this before.
In politics, there's often what's called the smell test. It may or may not be illegal, but it doesn't smell just right. Something isn't okay. And let's walk through the various steps here. Hunter Biden doing business internationally while his father is vice president, that's not illegal.
Not illegal.
Hunter Biden making as much money as he can make. I think there was one situation where he got a $10 million check in China for introductions, according to his own email, for making introductions. Not illegal.
Right, but there are some things. He never registered as a foreign agent. There are some of those concerns that could be part of that. But introducing people, lobbying people, that's actually lobbying and petitioning the government is actually kind of certainly a First Amendment protected activity.
But then the line gets blurry. He went on Air Force Two. He went with then Vice President Joe Biden to China on one of the trips and conducted business while he was there and talked to Dad and so on. You mentioned the Burisma situation. The lines get blurred somewhere along the line, and then there are checks that were written or deposits that
Yeah.
were made in President Biden's bank accounts. Tell me about those.
Yeah, I think it was just a continuation of what started back in 14, 15, 16. So I think if you step back and kind of give it the broad context here, I think Joe Biden probably figured, okay, I'm done in politics after 16. Hillary Clinton's running for president. She's going to win, he thought. She's going to be president for the next 8 years. I'm not going to run in 2024, even though he looks like he's going to run in 2024. Things have changed. But I think at that point he was thinking like, okay, and Hunter Biden figures out, oh, Shazam, we can play this game of bringing people in, talking to my dad, and I can make money on it. Foreign interests decided, oh, there may be some real influence we could exercise over the guy who might potentially be the President of the United States.
Judiciary just issued a new report, the Justice Department Deviations from Standard Process.
Yeah.
When we talk about Hunter Biden, you mentioned his tax case and how some of the things got bumped off. Mr. Weiss did not prosecute things in a timely fashion so that the time period expired. Was the fix in, when we look at the report, was the fix in, or an attempt anyway, to put a fix in for Hunter Biden?
Yeah, but for the whistleblowers that got away with it.
And let's
Truly.
And let's talk about that, because the whistleblowers, you had FBI whistleblower, but you had IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, the tax body of the United States, who told the story that, well,
Great point.
maybe he wasn't treated the same.
We had a number of FBI whistleblowers come forward on other issues, on the Catholic memorandum, on the parents as terrorists issue, Justice Department issues, a number. I mean, even before we took Republicans took control of this Congress, we had like more than a dozen, I think up to close to 2 dozen whistleblowers come forward and talk to us about January 6th concerns, how that investigation. But on this particular issue, it was 2 IRS whistleblowers who came forward, and Mr. Shapley, Mr. Ziegler, they're the ones who gave us the information. And I think, but for that, they'd have gotten away with it. Now, the judge was great in Delaware too. The court was, and what they decided. But yeah, Mr. Shapley and Mr. Ziegler pointed out that this investigation was slow walked. The investigation team, Weiss's team, tipped off the Hunter Biden that they were looking to do a search of the storage unit. They were prohibited from any reference to political figure number one, and political figure number one was Joe Biden. In interviews they did get to do, which were very few, they couldn't bring up the president. They were told you couldn't look into possible campaign finance violations. So a number of things. But I think the biggest thing is what I said earlier. They let the statute of limitations lapse for the most important years, the years that dealt with the bulk of the Burisma income.
So we have the IRS not doing their job the same as they would for anybody else. We have a U.S. attorney not doing his job the same as he would for anyone else. We have the FBI. I mean, the FBI is supposed to be the top cops in the USA. They're supposed to be the gold standard in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. But we saw how things went with the Hillary Clinton investigation. We saw how things went with the Trump-Russia investigation. We saw how they handled Hunter Biden. Can people trust, not the men and women that are working on the front lines, but the framework, the bureaucracy of the FBI? Can we trust the top law enforcement agency in the United States to do their job?
Well, I think you make a good point. I think there are all kinds of good agents across this country who are doing the Lord's work, but I think the folks at the top, there's a problem there. It's why, for example, right now we're working on this reauthorization of the FISA law, particularly this what's called the 702 program, and we think it has to have major reform for what you just laid out, because the history of the FBI, this is the FBI that spied on President Trump's campaign. This is the FBI that said pro-life Catholics were extremists. This is the Justice Department that said parents were terrorists. This is the same FBI that censored Americans, again, not me, but the Fifth Circuit in the Fifth Circuit Court has indicated that, and that case is going to the Supreme Court. So yeah, I think if polling now shows, you ask the American people, can you trust the upper levels of the FBI? I think most Americans say no, we can't, and I think for good reason.
Let's shift gears for a minute. The January 6th committee in Congress was supposed to root out the truth as to what actually happened on January 6th and what role, if any, Donald Trump played in the riot that happened that day. Did they do their job?
No, this was a political committee. Started off political when Pelosi wouldn't let Republicans, the Republicans that the Republican leader wanted to put on the committee, wouldn't let them on the committee. And And we caught this committee in so often saying things that were not true. They lied about our colleague, Mr. Loudermilk, said he was doing reconnaissance tours. We caught him.
Let me reference that, because the accusation was a member of Congress, Mr. Loudermilk, gave tours to some of his constituents of the Capitol building and of the House office buildings, and they took photographs. They were filmed on CCTV taking photographs while they were going around. You've been in Congress a long time. Have you ever given a tour to constituents?
Yes, where they take pictures.
Of course they take pictures.
And there's always people want to get a selfie of with their congressman too. Like, for goodness sake, it's so ridiculous.
And the accusation was that somehow that was doing reconnaissance and scoping out in advance of January 6th.
It's so stupid. We caught them lying about me a couple times. They said that I'd sent a text message to the chief of staff. I'd forwarded a text message from a lawyer who was former inspector general to Don Rumsfeld, who works at a big law firm here, and I forwarded a text where he was referencing Federalist Papers. Somehow that's agreed. It's like they actually played this committee played a clip. You remember the ones that are about you where they lie. They played a clip, and I was doing an interview, and the clip said, I was on camera, and the clip said, I said, January 6th is the ultimate date of significance in a presidential contest. And they played that like, oh, this date was like, well, what they left out was the full quote, because I said, the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said January 6th was the ultimate date of significance in a presidential contest, because that's the day you ultimately decide. It gets approved by the House with the vice president standing there. All that's always referencing is how our system works. But, they made it sound sinister and bad. That's how bad this committee, how wrong this committee, how political this committee was.
January 6th has been labeled an insurrection. And when I look up the definition of the word insurrection, it is an organized attempt to overthrow the government. Was this an insurrection, or was this a riot, or do the words even matter?
I've been clear. I said we should condemn violence every time it happens, and we've been consistent. I'm sure you've been consistent. We've said that any wrongdoing that happened on January 6th, those people should be held accountable. It was wrong, and that's the way our system should work and does work. And we said the same thing about the summer 2020. We condemn the violence there. It'd be nice if the other side would condemn both, but they just want to go after January 6th. So I think there were some people who did things wrong that day, and they should be held accountable. But the left has just made this the end-all, be-all of their politics.
One of the great concerns in all of this, whether no matter what the scandal is or who we're talking about, is what to believe. And the January 6th committee released certain video footage. Mm-hmm. Recently, we've seen virtually all the video footage. There's some held back, but that shows more to the story, shall we say. There are certain times where the police and people are laughing and interacting, and they're, pointing. They realize at this point there's a limit to what they can do, so they're trying to handle it in a peaceful manner. Were those pieces intentionally withheld to change the narrative? And if so, how do Americans,
I assume so.
How does the world believe whatever's coming out?
I assume so. Because like I said before, this committee is purely partisan. Its whole agenda was to go after President Trump, and that's just what the left has been focused on. And they've been focused on it now for 7 years. Remember, they spied on his campaign. Then it was the Mueller investigation. Then it was impeachment. Then it was the special counsel. Then it was the four indictments, the two state courts, the two state prosecutors, I should say, in New York and Georgia, and then the federal prosecution by Jack Smith, the special counsel in Miami and D.C. And in between all that, they raided his home a little over a year ago. So, it's just continued to escalate, and we've even had cases where they're trying to keep him off the ballot, for goodness sake, which is, talk about, defending democracy. The left now wants to keep him off the ballot.
And let me ask, you mentioned all the various cases that he's facing. We have things ranging from mishandling of classified data all the way to paying off a porn star. There is the full gamut here when we talk about President Trump. Are these crimes that happened, and when the investigative bodies studied them, they found, it's connected to Donald Trump? Or were these alleged crimes because it's Donald Trump, and then they built a case?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think anyone who's objective sees that. It's the old scary line you heard referenced about, totalitarian regimes where it's, show me the person, I'll find the crime. It's like
Right.
they're after the person. And it's obvious from when, Jim Comey, he bragged about not following the process and procedure when they went and set up Mike Flynn, general, who served our country,
Right.
literally a few days into the Trump administration. They were so out to get President Trump. They spied on his campaign. They went after Flynn. That whole list of things they've done, to the point now where they're suing in certain state courts to try to keep him off the ballot. And yet they turn around and say they say they're the defenders of democracy, which is frightening. So this has always been about getting president. And the reason they want to get him is because he actually got in office and did what he told the American people he was going to do, and took on the swamp, the establishment, whatever you want to call it.
There were claims that Trump had caused the riots on January 6th. But I went back and read the speech again.
Yeah.
I read the transcript of the speech again. I thought, maybe after these years I've forgotten something. But there was one part that stood out to me where he said, peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Yeah.
That does not sound like he's inciting a riot.
No, he's not. He's not. And the courts have been clear in how they define incitement. President Trump did not do that. He did not incite it. But that doesn't matter to the left. They're, like I said, they're out to get him, and they're gonna do whatever they can to try to get him. I don't think it's working, as evidenced by the polls. He's winning in every single poll, both in the primary and, frankly, in a general election contest against Joe Biden.
I mentioned a minute ago, how are people to decide what to believe and what not to believe? And trust in Congress is not high. Trust in the media is not high. Trust on either side of the political spectrum, not high. If half the people think Joe Biden is corrupt, and if half the people think Donald Trump is crazy or inciting violence or however he's been labeled, how much damage does that do in the big picture to the democracy we call, the republic we call the United States of America?
Yeah, I wish we didn't have this polarization and divide like we do, but I still trust the people in the end to get it right. And I think they will this upcoming election. I always say the left controls just about everything. The left controls big media. The left controls big tech. The left controls, big corporations. The left controls Hollywood. The left controls higher education. The left controls big sports. The left controls so much of primary and secondary education now, it seems like. But in the end, the left doesn't control we the people. And we the people, as our founding document starts off with, I think the people get it right. And I think they can see, wow, this administration has done everything wrong. We went from a secure border to no border. We went from safe streets to record crime. We went from $2 and $3 gas to $4 and $5 gas. We went from a good energy policy to no energy policy and a bad energy policy. We went from stable prices to record inflation. We went from being respected around the world to Joe Biden. And frankly, we went from a government that actually served the citizens to one that's been turned against them. And I think when they step back and look at all that, particularly their pocketbook, they're going to say, I ain't voting for that again. I'm voting for President Trump.
The election in 2024 appears, anything could happen in the next year, but appears as though it might be a rematch between Donald Trump as the Republican, Joe Biden as the Democrat. And we look at the foreign policy. Let me just shift gears here for the final question, and that is, when we look at the Middle East, Donald Trump developed the Abraham Accords. Brought together Arabs and Jews, brought together portions, anyway, of the Middle East to be cooperative and have ongoing cooperative agreements. Now, it is a stark contrast. We see innocent civilians on both sides in Gaza and in Israel dying, being maimed, being hurt, their lives completely torn apart under the Biden administration. Is that due to the perceived weakness? It's a two-part question.
Yeah.
Is that due to the perceived weakness of the Biden administration and the president himself? And how important is the perception of the American president and his administration to the stability and safety of the people in the Middle East?
It's huge. Mike Pompeo was asked a question when Russia first went into Ukraine. As the former Secretary of State, he was doing an interview. It's like a year and a half ago. He was asked the question, Mr. Secretary, would this have happened in a Trump administration with Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State? Would this have happened? Would Russia win in Ukraine? And former Secretary Pompeo gave a great answer. He said, well, the short answer is I don't know. But I do know this. It didn't happen in a Trump administration.
How important is the perceived strength and support of the United States to the stability in that region?
Well, I mean, it's critical, and it's why President Trump, through the great work of Ambassador Friedman, Mike Pompeo as the secretary, Jared Kushner as an aide to President Trump, were able to get those Abraham Accords because they understood you stand with Israel. I mean, I think what changed the dynamic was when President Trump campaigned and said, "I will put the embassy in Jerusalem," and all the other presidents, all the other people running for president, both parties had said they would do it when they get elected. And they get elected, and the State Department said, "Oh, there's tons of reasons why you can't do it." And they gave him all kinds of reasons why you couldn't do what you said you were going to do. Trump gets in there and he goes, "I'm going to do what I said." And that'd be terrible. He did it. That set the tone. And that's why our country was able to get those Abraham Accords done and do things that benefited not only our best friend and ally, the state of Israel, but also people in the region. And now you have weakness in the Oval Office, and you see this mess that's going on over there.
Mr. Chairman, a pleasure as
You bet.
always.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Thanks, Tim.
Drawing a line between fact and hyperbole. Chairman Jim Jordan, responsible for investigations looking at both leading candidates for President of the United States. From Washington, D.C., I'm Tim Constantine. Thanks for joining us.